Welcome to Turning People into Supporters and Employees into Ambassadors with Story. If you are watching this training, thank you so much for agreeing to this special presentation. I am your host, Sharice Floyd Thompson, the president of Storymakers Consulting, and let's just dive right in. We now live in a connection driven society. We're starving for connection even more so at the height of this pandemic that we're all living through, the behind the screen world that we have been forced to adjust to. But as you know, as nonprofit leaders, life still goes on. There's still work to be done, and there's still an organization to run. But we're much more driven to connect with each other. There's been a shift from in person to a more virtual world that doesn't have that same kind of connectivity. We now have a new expectation about what connection is, what professionalism is, what it is that we want to give our money to, and how we want to show up in the world in the midst of this pandemic. The way we work has certainly changed. For many of you who are probably still working from home and trying to figure that stuff out all on the fly, as well as your donors and constituents. And what we really need right now is to get reacquainted. We're all starving for that human connection. In today's presentation, I'm going to talk to you about a couple of things. I'm going to quickly tell you who I am. We're going to talk about why storytelling is important. We're going to talk about why do you need it, or if you need it at all. Why you're not doing it. If you know that you need it, what are the benefits of storytelling? What's the cost of not telling stories? I'm going to introduce you to the Storymakers formula. And if you decide at the end of this presentation that you would like my help in bringing your organization together to turn people into supporters and employees into ambassadors, then I will give you that information on how we can move to the next level. So again, I'm Sharice Floyd Thompson. I am the president of Storymakers Consulting. I'm also a TEDx Ocala speaker. I come to you with 15 years of experience in story, marketing, and public relations. I, at one time, was also a one-person show in nonprofit where I worked as the director of marketing and development, and I was a team of one doing all the things. I'm a speaker, trainer, and author. I've been featured in a couple places, honored in some places, and right now I teach marketing at my local community college. So let's talk about why storytelling. Externally, people respond to emotion. Usually in nonprofit, we're very driven by the literal language of the numbers. Who have we impacted? How many people have come through the door? What has been the result? How many services have we provided? It's all very data driven because you've got people that you have to support, that you have to report to, right? And story is the opposite of that literal language. It is the language of emotion. It brings in the nuances of humanity and really puts that full context around those numbers. Internally, though, story gets everyone on the same page. I want you to think about your organization right now. If you took a poll and asked everyone in the organization, what are you all working towards? Can you all give a 3 to 4 or 2 sentence description of what it is that you're all working towards? and for each one of you to have a similar um, story or similar answer. If you cannot do that, then that means that you're not all on the same page. You're just churning through. You're just like a hamster on a wheel, just getting the work done, but not actually moving the organization or the people internally forward to something greater. Storytelling, quite frankly, is the language of the people. And as we're in that world that we talked about that needs, craving more connectivity, it is more important than ever. So, do you need storytelling? Let's take a look at it. When do you know that it's time for strategic narrative? Now, I'm not going to read all of these things. You can clearly see that. But when you're unable to communicate, what makes you different from the organization down the street that does something very similar? And maybe you're having a hard time getting the team internally wrapped around what you're doing, what I just mentioned. Are you all on the same page? Are your donations kind of stagnant? You're finding it hard to tell people what you do and why it's important and why they should give, or you don't really have much of a backstory, no growth, or maybe you feel like you don't have the best team in place for the work that needs to be done. You haven't recruited the best people. You just have people who are there willing to do the work, but it's not really their heart's desire to do the work. So if you have any of these, it's time to start thinking about what your strategic narrative is, because storytelling really can help solve these problems for you and your organization. Why are you not telling the stories then? If you have identified on that list previously that you do indeed need strategic narrative, then why are you not telling the stories? Well, it's not an efficient process. You don't have any kind of systematic way to collect the stories. I remember being in this position in a nonprofit, many nonprofits, and I was the person responsible for collecting the stories. And you would sit in the team meeting and you would ask for stories, and people would give you that blank stare. And you know you're solving problems, you know that you have people coming in taking in the services, but when you ask for a story, everybody goes blank. So then nothing gets told, or you're left trying to come up with something that's not necessarily true, or coming up with something that doesn't really show the true benefit of your work. One of the reasons that you're not doing it is that people are in those silos. We do love to stay in our silos in nonprofit, and we're not coming across the lines to kind of connect with each other and determine what the other people in the organization are doing. And that's really an issue of culture when you have one person responsible for every story that is in a big organization, big or small. You tell the same story for every single opportunity. You may, add a few extra details, but it's really just one story that you have that you tell over and over and over. And while this is not necessarily a bad thing, we'll talk about it a little later on in this presentation, it is not the best way to get people engaged. And you don't have anything to draw on. If you have just one story, you don't have a collection of stories that you can go to at any given time, at any given situation, and pull out the right story that is going to get that result that you're looking for. This right here, the why you're not doing it, is a really big deal. And all it means is that you need, a system, something to just help you get it not make more work for yourself. Because again, sometimes we are a department of one, and just making more work for yourself is something that no one is actually looking forward to. So I totally get this. But the benefits of story are so great in terms of your work. We all know that stories are responsible for the fundraising. This is the why. Why are you doing what you're doing? This is what makes people care about your cause. It's not so much that you took in, you gave out 100 book bags or that you served a particular number. It's the faces behind those numbers. And these types of stories appear, the ones that help you raise your money, appear in your appeal letters and your grants and your in-kind donations and online fundraising and board giving. It's all of those stories that make people kind of take hold to what it is that you do and want to see you succeed because the cause is near and dear to their hearts. And so when you put stories into this kind of a context, you really give people the push that they need to open their wallets up to you, because it's that idea of the money that they're giving to you is for you to then go out into the world and do the work. So we know that storytelling is really important when it comes to fundraising. Storytelling is great when you want to talk about your mission. Why do you exist? Where was the need? Why are you the organization to solve it? What would happen? What would have happened in the community had you not stepped up to solve it? And what do you want your organization to be known for? This is the backbone of a story that needs to be told so that people understand your importance in the community and in the lives of the people that you serve. But story is also good in the realm of development. Are you actually really truly making a difference? What does that growth and sustainability really look like? This is how you get that donor buy-in when you're telling the story of being community focused. Where was your organization um, collaborating with another organization, and how did that collaboration make the two of you stronger? These are things that you want to be able to report out that are not numbers driven, that are more emotionally driven, that bring in and keep that element of humanity going consistently over and over and over. Because at the end of the day, the stories truly are the memoirs of your mission. Like, what is the impact that you're really making? We want to see the proof of your goodwill, your change in action, that emotion on display. And so when that you put an ask out to a donor, you can really quantify that ask because you're telling a story that shows that impact. What is it that you're truly doing to change lives, right? And when you're working in nonprofit, it's so much purpose driven and heart driven, and it really is about that impact. And we can get stuck behind those numbers reporting that literal language that we forget that in order for people to move forward, we have to hit them in that emotional language to get them to do the thing that we need them to do. And then, of course, the story is about connection, the voice of the community. And this could be your team building. This is breaking down those silos. This is volunteers who are coming into your organization and feeling like more than volunteers. These are board of directors who are coming to serve your organization and feeling like Not that they're down in the weeds, but that they are the board that can help move that mission forward. We see the connection in social media when you're telling the story of someone that you have helped, or when you're recruiting, going back to maybe feeling like you don't have the best people in place. You can tell stories in your recruitment process and your onboarding process, so people come into the organization not only knowing what the expectation is, but knowing what the culture is and what they're going to be working towards. They're not pushing papers per se. This is something that's deeper than that. These are the types of stories that you want to be telling. It's culture driven. It's woven. It's woven into the fabric of the organization. Woven. That's funny. So, what is the cost to you if you're not telling the stories? Here's the thing: story is about communication. Supporters need to see themselves. 76 people say they would rather spend their money on experiences. So, what does that mean for you? It is no longer okay to just be a nonprofit and expect for people to want to give to you and donate their time, talent, and treasures. Again, we're back to that now connection driven world that we all are really craving more than ever. And people are spending for experiences, and stories are experiences. Stories allow you to delight your audiences. Stories allow you to pull your audiences into the narrative. Stories allow for connection and communication. And when we're living in a time right now where people are spending their money where their values align, you no longer have you no longer have the option to not tell a story, because you will be left behind by those organizations that get it and have chosen to make story a priority in their organization. But then story really is about retention as well. And this is about turning those employees into ambassadors. 88% of employees believe a strong company culture is key to business success. Employees need to feel valued. That value comes from knowing where their position not only falls in the organization chart, but falls in the organization's heart of the mission. What does my work do to move this mission forward? And not just about numbers, but in emotional terms. It is really expensive, the cost of losing an employee and the turnover, and to get a new person up and running. People walk out the door with company secrets. You have to start from the beginning. It really is hard on an organization when there is so much turnover. And a story, lots of stories, true connective stories, can have a profound impact on that turnover. So I want to introduce you to the Storymakers formula, because truly it should be easy. I've mentioned to you that I used to be that person of one. And when I was working, the last nonprofit position that I had, I was working in a domestic violence agency, and it was up to me to write the stories that got the donations. We were not meeting budget. Some people had already been let go. And I was tasked with being able to bring in money for the organization. Now, at this point, we had never written stories, not truly. Our thank you letters were pretty basic. Thank you for $25 donation. You can use this for, keep this for your records, for your taxes. You know, it was really, truly basic, a missed opportunity to tell a story. Our annual appeals were pretty much the same. We need X amount of money. There's a thermometer or some sort of ticker, help us reach our goal. Not very much emotion there, very, you know, sterile, very literal. And so that wasn't working. And I needed to figure out how to tell these stories, and not only tell these stories, because I was working in a domestic violence agency, I also had to be able to tell the stories and conceal who I was speaking about. Now, some of you may work in domestic violence and can know how hard it is for people to care about that. There's a lot of victim blaming in domestic violence, but I had to find a way. I didn't have an option. People's jobs were on the line, including mine. And so it took, you know, a little bit of time, but eventually I was able to create a system, a formula that I still use now when I work with organizations, when I work with corporations, and when I work with individuals. It works across all industries. I call it the Storymakers Formula. There's 3 parts to it: discover, shape, and share. And right in the middle is where you make that connection and where the money ultimately lies. Right in the middle is where you turn people into supporters and employees into ambassadors. First thing that I do when going into an organization, after we do the assessment to determine the landscape of your stories, is that then we move to discover your true stories. This is the data mining process. This is, you know, outlining your values and beliefs to determine your organization's goals, and just setting up an interview structure. How do you plan to interview your clients? List of questions that you need to ask to make sure that you're getting the correct information that you need, that the story that you're going to tell is going to take people on a journey. And so that data mining process becomes very intense, because what we're doing is, you know, looking for the best stories to tell in the right situations. And so the very first part is to discover what you already have and to see those stories through a different lens. Next, we want to shape those stories into a product. The stories of your organizations are actually assets, and they should be looked at that way. They are not just stories just for the sake of stories. They're assets to you in the same way of your branding and any other asset that you have at your disposal in your nonprofit. So when you discover the stories, they're in their raw form. In the shape process, this is where we turn those, we make those into actual assets that you can use again and again and again. And I developed something called the 5-6-7 method. Remember, I said it should be super easy, because you want people to be able to do it. You don't want those blank stares. Remember at the meetings where you're like, tell me a story. After the 5-6-7 process, you should be able to tell a story, not even kind of worry about it. Okay? So in the shape process, There are 5 components of a story. There are 6 stories you need to tell, and then there's a 7-part story structure. When you're shaping stories into a product, you need all of these pieces, okay? You need the 5 components and you need the 7-part story structure. The 6 parts is just you needing to know what type of story you're telling. And this will make sense in a couple slides down. But this is shaping it into an asset. This is the part that a lot of nonprofits miss. They just tell a story, they move on, and then the next time that they need a story, they're looking for something different, looking for something different. And you don't necessarily need to have something different if the discover process has done its work. Then you will have a bank of stories that you can pull from. And when new stories come about, you'll be able to identify them much more clearly and be able to put it into the 5, 6, 7 method. Now we need to determine who needs to hear the story, because these stories don't do any good if they're just internal, if they're left on someone's computer or written down somewhere. Now you need to share the story. This is where you actually get to move people to action, where you're building the culture now and where you're integrating stories into all aspects of the organization. Sharing the story is determining where the story needs to appear, from a thank you letter to an appeal to the media to a case for support. When you know where you're going to share them, then you have a better idea. Even, your websites and printed materials and marketing materials and things like that. And so it means nothing just to know the story. It means nothing just to be aware. You have to then share the story in order to get all of those benefits that we talked about, from the fundraising to the development to getting your mission out into the world. The benefits come from sharing the story. So here are a couple of the story types that I help you create. Remember, part of the 5, 6, 7 method, that 6 is the 6 types of stories that you need to tell. Here are 4 of them. The origin story is pretty simple. What's the origin of your organization? What do you believe? Who do you represent? What do you value? And how do you create heroes, in the sense that how do people take what you do and then go into their lives and then be better? What sometimes often happens is that organizations tell the story of the history of everywhere that they have been, every time they moved an office, every time they bought a fax machine. They give you this chronology as the story of the origin story, and that is not by any means what an origin story is. And that, again, when you talk about that 5, 6, 7 method, the 5 knowing what the 5 components of a story is, you could quickly see that a history of the chronology of where you've been doesn't match for the 5 pieces. So there's that origin story. There's the impact story. This is the story that bridges the gap between what you need and what you ask for. These are absolutely the memoirs of your mission. This is where you see the mission in action. This is where it plays out and you show the value that you're bringing to people's lives in an impact story. The purpose story is showing the mission in action. It reiterates why you exist. It's telling people, had you not started this organization, this would have been a bad thing. We exist because this is necessary. This is how you're moving people into that purpose-driven, heart-centered way. I give you money because this purpose means something to me. I give you money because I can see the impact of what it is that you do. And then we have the human interest story, which just shows the mission and action across all the constituents from your community, your staff, your volunteers, and your donors. This is where you're actually showing how these different groups are out in the community doing great things. And where a lot of nonprofits get this wrong is that they consistently show their board out doing certain things. The board went to the gala, the board went to the golf tournament. And in and of itself, people do not care about that. You're put that out as the story, and that's just a human interest story. And a lot of times it's an ego story for the board members, but it's not a story of purpose where your board is located. It's not a story of impact where your board is located. And it's definitely not a story of origin where your board is located. So these are 4 of the 6 types of stories that we help you craft in the 5, 6, 7 method. The old way of doing things is that stories were left to one person. One person with everything else that they have on their plate cannot possibly tell the breadth and depth of the stories that you have in your organization. The new way is that stories are a part of the culture. You become a culture built around storytelling because your stories become assets. They are not just something that is an afterthought. It is built in so that you are connecting internally and working towards a common cause before you connect externally to bring people into that cause. So, if you want my help and Storymakers' help in order to be able to turn people into supporters and employees into ambassadors, here is our process. We take you through discovery where we meet with the team members who are responsible for story. And I just mentioned that everybody should be responsible for story, but it can be difficult to get the whole organization in a room. And so we meet with the people who really need to be a part of the process, and then we effectively design an action plan. We outline those workflows, what the staff requirements are, the timeline, the budget, the training schedule, and our goal is to get you set up to lead a more active role in data mining, in the crafting and in the telling of the stories. Our goal is to teach you the Storymakers formula and the 5, 6, 7 process so that when we walk out the door, you are equipped to continue to do this. And it is really important to us that it remains easy to do. Okay? Then we help you implement this. We offer additional on-site training. We offer the implementation of the action plan, whether that's full, partial, or you do have the ability to license the Storymakers formula in our process and to be able to teach it to incoming people in your organization as you move throughout continuing to serve. And then there's a follow-up because we're committed to your success. It's not just enough for us to show up and show you how to do it. We want to come back to see how well it has worked for you. We'll set up benchmarks for you to review and your progress, and we will monitor your return on investment. One of the things that I want to say as far as story and how do you know that it's working? In the beginning, I talked about how taking a poll, if you poll people and everyone gives you an answer of what they think they're working towards, and their answers are not similar, you know that you have a problem and that you need storytelling in your organization. One of the ways that you know that it's working is that taking a poll again after you have gone through this process and people can consistently give you answers that are relatable. The stories as the assets become the North Star of the organization, where everybody knows, everyone can see. It should be aspirational. You can all see it. You can orient yourselves around that North Star and know what you're working towards internally and externally. That you all can not only recite your internal mission and vision, but you can really understand what the values and beliefs are of your organization, and you can understand what your organization's experience is to the outside world. Your brand is not what you guys are saying internally. Your brand is what people are saying about you when you're not in the room. And in order for that story to be a good one, in order for people to not be talking about you behind your back, internally, you all need to be on the same page to be working towards something that spills out externally. Okay? And in our follow-up process, those are the things that we want to help you with. Because right now, we all connect differently. We've all connected differently anyway. But truly, when we start to roll out of this pandemic, we all will be looking for different types of connections. And we all give differently. But the good news for you is that we do give, and we give across generations. And when you can tell a story that can reach millennials and Gen Xers and baby boomers and the silent generation, and reach them in the way that they like to be reached, they will come through for you. So your language will change, obviously, depending on which generation that you're speaking to, but the emotion of what you're conveying will always be the same. Humanity is the same no matter how old you are, okay? It's just a matter of tapping into it well enough for people to care about your cause. Your main goal is to get people to care about your cause, and storytelling is the language that makes people care. So our promise to you from Storymakers is that we will take the complicated story structures and processes and make it easy for you to understand, because we need your team to be able to recreate this process over and over and over again without anyone becoming overwhelmed, or worse, without you telling any stories. We believe that great stories are about more than what we remember. Great stories are about what we convey. And that is the make of the makers process. Taking raw stories and making them into true assets are what allows us to help you tell the stories of your organization. You want to give people something to believe in. Give people something to believe in, and we will absolutely give back to you. So now, let's start your story. If you are ready to work with Storymakers Consulting, and I'll go back to this slide. Please feel free to reach out to me. There should be contact information below this video. Reach out and let's just have a conversation about the stories. Let's have a conversation about what's going on in your organization and how Storymakers can come in to help you really, really pull stories into your culture. If you have been working in nonprofit for any length of time, you know that stories are important. You know that you can't get away from it. Isn't it time now to finally make it a priority. I would love to help you do that. So please, let's get in touch. Thank you so much for watching this broadcast, and I hope to hear from you soon. Bye.